Greetings, my faithful followers. And for those of you who have yet to make my acquaintance, allow me to introduce myself. I am Dr. Tikyll. And what you are about to see is the reading of 2 chapters from the story which bears my name. They are told from the perspective of my associate, back from the time when she shared the same name as my father. They are the recollections of her time spent with father, and everything that led up to what eventually happened, to the present time where she is now simply known by the simple title of Jester. Perhaps she will learn from these recollections and realize her folly. Perhaps others will learn from her recollections as well. Perhaps even you. So please, attend carefully.
Right, so that brings us to our cameraman and resident horror novelist with one of the best characters ever. Every meeting we wait to see where Dr. Tikyll is now. And in fact, one of my favorite parts of our meetings is when we do have visitors and new members, because we get to hear Duanne re-explain this whole plot about a guy with the best way of killing people ever. Duanne Walton is from Morris, Illinois. He has been writing for as long as he can remember as well. He's had short stories, poems, and reviews published in various amateur publications, websites, and blogs over the years. Usually he writes, well, whatever strikes his fancy. This is absolutely true. We never know what he's going to come in with, and it's always entertaining. Tonight he's going to be reading 2 chapters from his mystery thriller, The Torturous Doctor Tikyll. He asked me to explain it this way: Dad commits suicide, son seeks revenge, fatal hilarity ensues. Duanne Walton.
I don't think I have to worry about projecting, because this chapter is from the point of view of Wanda, for those of you who know. She is the wife of the father who committed suicide, and now she is the son's reluctant accomplice. But in between killings, she's been having flashbacks to her life with her former husband, and, well, this is one of them. The big doofus walked out on stage in front of the massive crowd on that warm July evening. He could have at least tucked his shirt in and combed his hair so he didn't look like a total slob. Shania Twain handed him the microphone, and he announced he had a special woman in his life. The crowd cheered, and Alan with them, blasting Wanda's eardrums and almost hitting her in the shoulder as he pumped his fists into the air. He noticed and whispered an apology. She glowered at him. The special woman walked out on stage, and Wanda's stomach tingled. She covered her mouth with her fingers and mentally begged the idiot not to humiliate the poor woman in front of all these people. Sure enough, he took a little box out of his pocket, and the crowd went wild. Molten lava boiled in the pit of Wanda's stomach. Alan clapped and whooped. Everybody kept going nuts as the big doofus got down on one knee in front of his girlfriend and proposed to her. Wanda wanted to scream at her, to run for her life, as Alan's proposal to her in Barnes & Noble flashed through her head. At least he only humiliated her in front of the people in the magazine section. This idiot was doing it at a concert in front of who knew how many people. If this woman really was the greatest thing that ever happened to him, as he said, he wouldn't put her on display like this. Shania Twain made the woman say her answer into the mic. Absolutely. The crowd cheered, Alan jumped and hollered and applauded, and Wanda tasted puke in her throat. She tried to get to the nearest porta potty, but the shrieking, braying mob pressed all around her. She staggered her way through, her jaw turned into jelly, and everything started spinning. After lurching a few more rubbery steps, she fell to her knees and threw up on some woman's flip-flop clad feet. The universe faded to white. Everything came into focus as Wanda awakened on her cot. The full memory of that evening made her break into a sweat. Shania Twain had given a free concert in Chicago, and Wanda didn't want any of Alan's mealy-mouthed excuses as to why they couldn't go. He didn't offer any. Smart move. She had looked forward to the outdoor concert in the park on a summer's evening. She'd looked forward to losing herself in the live music of one of her favorite singers. And though she'd deny it with her dying breath, she looked forward to seeing Alan out of his comfort zone. High time he shut off his stupid computer and got out of his man cave to see what normal people did for fun. More than a small part of her hoped he'd have a miserable time. Alan just stood there not knowing what to do with himself while Wanda swayed and sang along to the music. She tried getting him to sing along too, but he didn't know any of the lyrics. Then she remembered he didn't do country music. Sorry, pal, no dancing nights. At least he applauded when the songs ended. And then Tall, Dark, and Stupid came out and the tables turned. Shania Twain thought it was all so sweet. Wanda's opinion greatly differed. She should have known Alan would find a way to ruin her evening. She actually wished it hadn't been a free concert, so at least there stood a chance of it being sold out and save everybody the humiliation. Wanda remembered Alan coming up behind her and helping her stand up, all the while apologizing to the fire engine-faced woman whose feet Wanda had just puked on, as well as to her teeth-clenched boyfriend. They made their way through the crowd in the parking lot, found their car, and drove home. Wanda spent the next 2 days in bed. Alan played the doting husband, doing the dishes, vacuuming the floors, taking out the trash, mowing the lawn, and leaving her alone. She laid under the covers of the darkened room, hoping that after they got off stage, that woman planted her knee into her moronic fiancé's crotch and shoved that ring down his throat. Turnabout is fair play, and Wanda got her chance when the Phantom of the Opera came to the Civic Opera House. Alan kept dropping not very subtle hints about wanting her to go see it with him. "You know how much I can't stand opera," she shrieked. "Sitting for 2 or 3 hours listening to that caterwauling? Are you out of your mind?" She thrust a finger at him. "Don't answer that, I already know." She glared at him. "They could at least sing it in English instead of whatever." He tried his best to look patient. What did his worst look like? As he told her it wasn't really an opera, but a regular musical. "Then why is it called an opera? And why are they showing it at an opera house?" Alan began sputtering. She had him on the ropes now and moved in for the knockout. "And who came up with the bright idea to make a musical out of a horror movie?" That one with the man-eating plant was a comedy, so it didn't count. He muttered something about it being romantic. "Why is it supposed to be romantic?" she demanded. Alan opened his mouth. "Why?" Wanda squawked and couldn't keep from grinning. Didn't really want to. And then he actually did it. Alan yelled at her. Would she go with him or not? Wanda stood there with her eyes and mouth wide open. He'd never yelled at her before, ever. She honestly thought he knew better. His eyebrows inched upwards as his eyes burned at her, waiting for an answer. Wanda soon found her voice. Or not. He nodded and his burning stare became ice. He then declared he'd go by himself. He spun around and marched out of the room. Wanda stood there fuming, the wheels in her mind turning. Did he really think that was the end of it? That he'd just leave her there all by her lonesome, go up to his hoity-toity opera house and talk about her to total strangers? He had another thing coming. She spent the next half hour bracing herself for what she had to do. When she thought she'd worked up enough courage, she looked for Alan. He sat in his lazy chair in the living room, turning his dad's pocket knife in his hand. She swore she'd throw that thing out the first chance she got. Wanda cleared her throat and licked her lips. He didn't look at her but kept staring at the wall. Could you put that down, please? She asked, hoping she sounded pathetic enough. He blinked, then set the pocket knife down on the lampstand next to his chair. He still didn't look at her. Wanda knelt down next to him and took hold of his hand. She cleared her throat again and whispered, I'm sorry. she'd make him pay for that. He turned and stared at her with bug-eyed surprise and demanded to know who she was and what she'd done with his wife. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "I'd love to go see it with you." Alan gawked at her. "Please talk to me." He muttered something about checking under the bed for seed pods. Okay. I read you that last one to read you this one. This is what happened when they went to see Phantom of the Opera. Wanda was pretty sure this qualified as spousal abuse. She sat on the bed in her slip and watched Alan shave, splash on what he considered cologne. She'd smelled better porta potties. Brush his teeth, brush and comb his hair, then put on his dress shirt, tie, and suit. He insisted on dressing up for this thing even though he didn't have to. That made no sense. But when did Alan do anything that ever made sense? He stood in front of her and twirled around with his arms out, fishing for compliments. Wanda just stared at him. He lowered his arms and asked her if she'd be getting ready, giving her his wounded puppy look. She'd put that puppy to sleep one of these days. Wanda sighed as she hauled herself up off the bed. She marched into the bathroom and slapped some secret under her arms. She'd write her body an IOU later. Then gargled with scope. She marched into the closet and snatched a white dress that caught her eye off its hanger. She scanned her shoes lined up on the closet floor and sniggered as she snatched up her favorite pair of cowboy boots. Blame it all on her roots. She showed up in boots. Alan insisted on parking at a garage 2 blocks away and walking. And he insisted on linking arms and holding her hand. Wanda felt the tension and rage welling up inside her as they approached the huge throne-shaped building. If the terrorists wanted to crash a plane into something, why couldn't it be this? Alan stood slack-jawed and goggle-eyed in the humongous lobby, staring up at the chandeliers that must have been a nightmare to clean. They had to keep moving or they'd be trampled by the crowd surrounding them. "What is this?" Wanda growled. "A lobby or a sardine can?" He whispered something about it being so awesome. She could have choked on all this awesomeness. They had a souvenir booth set up where people could buy all sorts of overpriced Phantom-related trinkets. Alan immediately started thumbing through a large book about the entire history of the Phantom that even included the script and lyrics for the show. "Why don't you buy it?" Wanda asked. Maybe then they wouldn't have to sit through the show since he could read it and see how it all turned out. But then she remembered he'd already shelled out the money for the tickets and they didn't do refunds, or so he'd said. Alan put the book back and glanced at the lady running the booth, then whispered something about seeing it cheaper at Barnes & Noble. Great. Another excuse for him to go toddling off to that stupid bookstore. But he did buy a pair of cheap plastic binoculars with Phantom of the Opera stamped on them, and said he'd probably get a t-shirt after the show. He then asked the lady behind the counter if the official masks they sold could be worn or were just for decoration. Either or, the lady smiled. Alan shot Wanda a smirk as she recognized only too well. Dread crept over her with the thought of being terrorized by the Phantom that night. With her luck, he'd get the soundtrack too and insist on lip-syncing for her. Wanda's stomach soured. Then Alan spotted a concession bar and insisted on making their way over to it through the pressing throng. Wow, this place was crowded. Wanda would be lucky if she didn't end up with claustrophobia before the evening ended. At the bar, Alan asked her if she wanted anything. Wanda looked around and saw nothing but liquor and beer bottles. "They've got nothing but alcohol here." The bartender overheard him. "We've got pop too, ma'am." Alan ordered a pop and asked her if she wanted one. She shook her head. She watched him stuff $1 into the bartender's tip glass, then started sipping his drink through the stirring stick. "You know that's for stirring your drink, right?" Wanda asked. He held up his cup and stared at the stick, then shrugged and resumed sipping. "I can't believe you dragged me to a place that serves alcohol," she muttered, staring at the bar counter. He reminded her that she didn't seem to have a problem with the beer served at Shania Twain's concert. Then everyone herded into the auditorium. The organ blasted through Wanda's skull and the lights blinded her eyes as the so-called music started. Why did everything have to be so loud and bright? She looked at Alan and everyone else around her. It didn't faze them at all. They just sat there gawking. How could they possibly be enjoying this? It must have been their missing eardrums. Alan offered her the plastic binoculars, and she shook her head. The lady in the opening scene couldn't carry a tune in a tote bag. "She's terrible," Wanda hissed. Alan whispered that she was supposed to be. Wanda struggled to wrap her head around it. They got someone that sings terribly on purpose? Is that a head she's carrying? He offered her the binoculars again. She bristled and turned back to the show. The guys inside the fake elephant were funny, and Wanda giggled with everyone else. The lady playing the Phantom's girlfriend sang a whole lot better, and in English, too. Everyone spoke and sang in English. What a relief, because Wanda didn't speak opera. The Phantom finally showed up and took his girlfriend to his underground hideout. "How long do you think it takes him to light all those candles?" she asked Alan. He didn't even pay attention. What a surprise. He just sat there mouthing the words to the Phantom's song. He thought he was the Phantom. Well, if he wanted to go live in the basement of some opera house and make an even bigger freak of himself, then he could be her guest. She wanted no part of it. That was the last straw. Alan could have his music of the night. Wanda started getting up to leave, then sat back down. Did he think she'd stalk back to the car and cry herself to sleep? Think again, Mr. Phantom. She had his disaster beyond imagination right there. Alan asked her if she was okay. "Why didn't you tell me I should have had my eardrums removed before I came to this?" He gave her his deer-in-the-headlights look. "You found the souvenir booth in the bar. Why couldn't you find the eardrum removal station? They could have at least posted warning signs." He asked her if he could try to enjoy this. Wanda smirked. "I don't know. Can you?" He rolled his head back to the action with a miffed expression. Everybody on stage caterwauled all at once, and Wanda couldn't understand a word of it. Not that she really wanted to. "Sing Goodbye Earl! Sing That Don't Impress Me Much!" Wanda called out. "Sing something that people can understand, not this gibberish!" She felt a hand on her shoulder. She waved it off. "Where's Reba? Where's Toby?" "Excuse me," a voice hissed in her ear. Wanda shot a glare at Alan. He sat there with his face in his hands. She turned around and stared into the nipped and tucked face of some aging prom queen leaning forward behind her. She looked like she wouldn't be caught dead at a country music concert. Wanda doubted she even knew who Reba McEntire and Toby Keith were. "Yes?" Wanda asked the prom queen. "Please," she whispered. "Please what?" "We're trying to enjoy the show." Wanda gave her a wide Cheshire grin. "Oh, I'm sorry. With all this racket going on, I didn't think anyone could hear me." The prom queen sat back in her seat with a disgusted look. It wasn't Wanda's fault the poor thing's coach turned back into a pumpkin decades ago. Wanda then glanced around and saw Alan wasn't the only one that insisted on dressing up for this. "Why didn't you tell me you reserved our seats in the snooty section?" Back on stage, the lady that sang badly on purpose kept it up. Only this time, she started letting out these loud, hoarse gasps, and the Phantom started laughing at her. Wanda didn't blame him one bit. "Keep it up," she said. "You sound a lot better." Some old codger leaned his puckered face alongside hers. "Do you mind?" She smiled at the old coot. "No, I don't mind." Then these ballet dancers came out and twirled around on their toothpick legs while the Phantom capered in silhouette behind them. "Good thing they're not wearing red, or everyone will think they're thermometers," Wanda said, not caring who heard her. "The more the better." She began shaking with laughter. Alan sank into his seat with his forehand in his head. "What's wrong?" she cooed. "Headache?" Then a dummy hung from the top of the stage, and the dancers freaked out. In all the chaos, the Phantom's girlfriend decided to run off with her new pretty boy, and the Phantom didn't seem too happy about that. Normally, Wanda only saw this kind of drama when she watched Christine Bishop, only not as freaky. Then the music crashed and boomed, and the chandelier fluttered down on its line like the first leaf of autumn, coming to a stop just in front of the Phantom's girlfriend and swaying inches above the stage. The auditorium exploded with applause while Wanda exploded with laughter. Wanda sat chuckling in her seat, waiting for Alan to come back from wherever he'd skulked off to during the intermission. And she didn't think she'd enjoy herself. This was a blast! Then she looked up and saw the prom queen coming with an usher. She smiled at them. They didn't smile back. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the usher said ever so seriously, "but I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." Wanda stood up beaming. "With pleasure." She peeked over his shoulder to see Alan trudging towards them, clutching an official Phantom of the Opera shopping bag. Hope you remembered his official Phantom of the Opera laxatives. Perfect timing. Are you ready? The defeated look on his face as he nodded made it all worthwhile.